Hello everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of Beyond the Spine. Today I have a special guest, Logan. I am very excited to be talking about today's film. Logan, what movie did you choose?
I chose Akira Kurosawa's classic 1954, Seven Samurai.
Why did you choose Seven Samurai?
When I was looking through the list of Criterion movies, I saw that Seven Samurai was on there, and that was just kind of a no-brainer for me because it's one of my favorite movies. If anyone knows me well enough, it's that I love Japanese history, culture, art, and a lot of that goes beyond just anime. I'm not even that big on anime. I have my picks, but when it comes down to like Japanese art and culture and all that, I tend to go more for like the classics. And so I figured to do a movie review, I'd pick this one.
No, you definitely picked a great choice. This was my first time watching the film this year, and I was blown away. It's one of the best action films I've seen. Well, I just wanted to ask you a few questions before we get into the discussion. I know you're pretty new to film in general, right?
More or less. I grew up watching a lot of movies, but I didn't really like get into the nitty gritty until like within the last couple of years. So relatively new, yeah.
Okay, all right. I was going to ask you, what were some criterions you were thinking of picking up?
I was thinking about picking up The Thin Red Line and Uncut Gems.
No, those are two very good picks. I like the cover for Uncut Gems. Just that packaging in general is incredible. It shines, and the booklet inside is like the pamphlet that he has in the store, along with the essays and the supplements, are incredible. The 4K transfer is really great too. The Thin Red Line, I've heard a lot about that film. I do not own it, but I've heard plenty of great things about that film. I know it's from Terrence Malick. It's a 3-hour war epic, so I'm looking forward to checking that one out. One other question I had for you was, what are some of your favorite Criterion arts?
I would say Dazed Confused and the complete Godzilla set, specifically the Godzilla Raids Again, just because I love the way it outlines itself with like the art of the monsters. It's like almost a mix of like the Aztec art and the way it's very angled, but it still retains like that classic like Japanese like wood art, if I'm saying that correctly, or referencing that. And then Dazed and Confused just has like that classic like psychedelia look to it, like the bubbles that show like the different characters' faces, like Matthew McConaughey's and everybody else's.
Yes, the Dazed and Confused one is a very gorgeous Criterion cover. I love the packaging for that one as well. It's a very trippy, and it fits so well with the movie, of course.
Yeah.
And it's just so cool. I was a bit disappointed when I found out that the reprints for the Blu-ray version are no longer in that cool packaging. That's only the 4K now.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately. And the Godzilla set is something that's I've been wanting for ages. I really want it. I will jump in on it one day, just one day. Maybe during the 50% off sale. I probably will. It's so cool to look at. I held it once and I was just like, wow, this is so cool. It feels like a giant pop-up book in a way.
It's like holding an entire mythology like in your hands.
Yes, it's very cool. And the way everything's laid out, the posters, the discs, it just looks so cool.
And a fun fact about Godzilla is that the first one and Seven Samurai came out the same year. In 1954.
Yes, I was reading about that.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
Both by Toho.
Very big movies for sure. Very big. Especially for that time period.
Yeah, and that was a very interesting time period for like Japanese cinema in general, because they were still, I don't know how heavy the American occupation of Japan was at the time, but I know it was still occurring, and they still had influences on Japanese cinema. Like filmmakers like Kurosawa and the others had pretty strict guidelines on what they could show on film. They couldn't really comment on not only the American occupation, but also like everything else that happened to them previous, like for World War II, which I'm sure we're all aware of. But yeah, and that was a very interesting time also because Akira Kurosawa wanted to make a classic Japanese samurai movie without sort of picking at the wound that Japan was suffering through at the time, because at the end of World War II, I mean, the emperor had surrendered. Japan was all but basically obliterated. At that point, they had lost all their resolve. So I think some of the worry at that time was making a samurai movie might like reignite tensions between Japan and America, which at that point Japan just couldn't really do. Like they couldn't afford any more fighting with the Americans. So Kurosawa had to kind of walk on eggshells a little bit, but I think his process of making this movie just kind of ended up helping what made it turn into its successful version, if that makes sense.
No, I see where you're coming from. I get it. Like I noticed that there's a few moments where I felt like Akira Kurosawa, I'm not saying that he didn't know what he was trying to do, but like you could tell he was still figuring something out, but the outcome just comes out perfectly. I will bring up something that does happen in the ending of the film a little later on, where it's a perfect example of that, but we'll talk about that later. The last question I wanted to ask you is, how did you discover Seven Samurai?
It was a movie I was always kind of aware of. Like growing up, I had seen like that classic still image. I don't know if it was ever made into a poster, but it was of the Seven Samurai like in a field of grass. And you see the character Kukuchiyo presented kind of foremost with his very long sword. There's a certain term for it. It's not a katana, but it's a very long sword, and he kind of has it like up on his shoulder like this, and it's just it stuck out to me even as a kid, and I think that's kind of like it planted the seed for me starting to really appreciate not only foreign art in general, but specifically Japanese art. And I couldn't really tell you the like core reason why I love it so much, but there's just something about it all that really just draws me in. I don't know if it's the warrior aspect of it or the Buddhist aspect of it. Maybe it's all of it. But ever since I was a kid, I've just always been drawn to that kind of art. And that poster certainly kind of planted the seed for my inevitable viewing of the movie, which, funny enough, didn't occur until like last year.
I first found out about Seven Samurai when I watched this YouTuber's video on the Criterion starter pack, and Seven Samurai was one of those choices, and I was just so interested in it. The packaging alone was really cool, and then I did a little bit of research on the movie and found out like Star Wars took some influence from the movie, a bunch of animes that I love took influence from the movie, and obviously the joke of Bug's Life took influence from the movie, and so did the Magnificent Seven. And then I watched the Magnificent Seven 2016 version with my grandpa because he really wanted to see it. And he was telling me like that wasn't really a good remake. I was like, yeah, it definitely wasn't. And he was saying, but if you want to see a better version of this film, watch Seven Samurai. And I've been wanting to for the longest time. I just have not had the time because of that big runtime.
Yeah.
But I will say though, when I first watched it, that runtime, it's perfect.
Yeah, like once you get into watching it, you kind of forget how long it is because it is a very immersive story. Like it really puts you into this period of Japan. This was roughly, I want to say the 1600s.
Yes.
And that's kind of an interesting segue into the historical background into the movie. You know, it's set after the civil wars of Japan, after it completely broke apart, and right before the Tokugawa shogunate. Because around this time, there were some emperors who were so impoverished that they were selling their calligraphy just to make money. Like the emperor of Japan used to be broke, flat, bloody broke. And then it wasn't until the Tokugawa shogunate that actually brought a level of prosperity, not only to the emperor, but to the rest of Japan as well. And so where this movie takes place is right around that time where everything was split apart. There were bandits everywhere. And that includes samurai. Like a lot of pop culture, specifically American, I would say, likes to show the samurai much like the Western cowboy, like the Clint Eastwood, John Wayne cowboy, where they're like these lone warriors that fight for good. But there are plenty of like samurai who were just bandits, you know. They had a weapon and they were aggressive, and they turned that into bad deeds. They raided villages and kidnapped and did terrible things to many people. But there were obviously those samurai who they didn't fall into that kind of life. You know, they defended people and they did the good thing. They did the best thing they possibly could do at that time. Mm-hmm. And one thing I found out just recently was the thing that initially inspired this movie was that one of the writers, I will be honest, some of these names are very hard to pronounce because not only am I American, I'm Texan. So I'll just say one of the writers. It wasn't Kurosawa, but it was another one of the three main writers. They were trying to do a slice of life scene for this movie. We're trying to show like how a samurai wakes up, how they get ready for their day. And they said, that's a little too much. And so they went back to kind of do some more research. And what they ended up finding out was that during this really turbulent time in Japan where there are bandits everywhere, some of the samurai would go to villages and serve on a night watch to defend the village from bandits so they can get like breakfast or food and housing for the night, you know, just as a passing by, you know, when they're going from village to village on their travels, you know, if they just defended the village for a night, served the, you know, watched the perimeter of the village, then they would be granted the amenities. And that's kind of what sparked that core idea of, samurai defending a village during times of like, of a lot of bandit no-goodery.
No, I one thing that I was going to bring up about this was that I remember I was looking through trivia through IMDb. Apparently, based on the entire research that they did, they found out that some of these characters are based on real people.
Yeah.
Which I found very fascinating, and just it hurts a lot more knowing that going into the movie. Just knowing the outcome of this film, it's heartbreaking for sure, but it's just done so well. And one thing I wanted to move forward with was talking about the action.
Yeah.
The action, my problem with action movies today is that they just don't give me a reason to care. Where, for example, Beekeeper just came out. Why should I care for this man?
Yeah, I see posters for it, and then I forget it exists.
Me too.
It's one of those just whatever movies. I mean, there are definitely good action movies that have come out that we all know of. You know, John Wick, and John Wick kind of seems to be more the exception to the rule.
Yes, it does.
And I think I'm not too sure where the director of that movie had. I'm not too sure how much inspiration he took from Kurosawa, but I know his implementation of action was just done more effectively throughout the John Wick series than most other series like Mission Impossible or the Fast and Furious franchise. And you'll get action, but it's just...
There's no tension, there's no build-up, that emotional impact is not there. Where like for John Wick 4, I feel it for sure. And I will say, though, I do feel the emotional impact for Mission Impossible, but just mainly the recent films. I know some people were not a big fan of Dead Reckoning, but I still feel like it was still there, but it definitely needed more room to grow, for sure. And the other action film that I think does it so well, especially since I haven't even seen the series fully, is Mad Max Fury Road. I think it's done so well as a person who has never seen the movies, and the movie actually made me care about Max. It's just flat out insane.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think a lot of modern studios these days are scared to make like that 3.5-hour epic like Kurosawa did for this movie. And I mean, to an extent, I understand it's hard to get audiences to sit in a seat for that long. I mean, you did the Lord of the Rings marathon. I couldn't imagine like that. But I think Kurosawa was just so confident in what he had created with the action that he implemented and the direction he was going for, to where he just said, those who will watch it. Not that he said it, but just through his creative process, it implied that like if you really want to experience this movie, you'll watch it all the way through. And to me, I wasn't worried about it once I got into it. I was like, wow, 3.5 hours. Damn. But as soon as I got into it, it was just...
Yeah, it was after the I would say pretty early on. I was surprised pretty early on. I was just like, yeah, I don't care about the runtime. I'm just into it. Was just from the opening scene alone was really great. It was a great startup. It's very simple. It's like, okay, here are the bandits. Here are the villagers. They're going to look for samurai. There. That's all you need to know.
There was the original script, or I'm going to say like one of the first drafts of the script, originally had the bandits raiding a village prior to the one shown in the movie. There was a whole scene filmed for that. I think it was like a 50-minute scene. Wow. Just to show that raid. And then Kurosawa just kind of said, we don't really need that. Not only because of American audience retention, but also because he thought it'd be more impactful to show the bandits had already raided a village. It kind of already shows that that's what these guys do. And it kind of shows, like you can kind of see in the movie that scene was filmed because one of the bandits says, shall we take this one too? So I think he went for just that line delivery, setting up the fact that they're bandits and that they're raiding the village and all that stuff. So I think to me that was a good move on his part.
Yes, it definitely was. It's very straight to the point, and I like movies that are like that. They don't take too much time to explain the plot, where it's like, okay, let's take 45 minutes to explain the plot of this movie. No, it's just like within the first 5 minutes, I already know what I'm getting into.
It's one of the few times where telling and not showing kind of benefited it rather than the other way around. Because most of the time, showing and not telling ends up being more effective. But at the same time, if you show too much, it kind of takes away from the actual story at hand. Yes, we know these are bandits. That's kind of all we need to know. Yeah,
I think it's really done well. That is a good point you brought up. Like, it's just, like I said, it's a very fast-paced movie, and I think that's why it works so well, the telling. It's just like you need that audience's attention, and it really grasps you right away into it. And a lot of the action sequences are just so, oh man, I can't describe it. Like, I was just sitting there in awe. And even though, like, I will admit, the first half is a little bit slow, but I think it works so well for me, mainly because it gives me time to, like, care about these characters a lot. Because once I got to the third act, I'm going to be real with you, I was crying.
Really?
I was crying. I was just like, no, please. It felt like I don't know who's going to die, who's going to survive. I genuinely don't know. And I was not ready for that outcome.
Who was your favorite character?
My favorite character, oh man, the one I really latched onto a whole lot was Kikuchiyo. I loved him so much. He is honestly one of my favorite protagonists in the film. His arc is just done so well. And one thing that I did notice that I haven't heard too much people talk about it, I can tell that Dragon Ball was really heavily inspired by his character. I was sitting there and I just could not stop thinking about Goku. Young Goku, to be specific. It's just like the poses he does, and just his energy was there, and I like that a whole lot. And just his character arc, from seeing him being like, oh, this silly old drunk, to like, oh man, this guy's been through a lot. And just that final act, that final like 15 minutes, time, when it's his time to shine, it hits he is hard.
Like glowing.
Yes, and the way he uses his body movement to act, it just really hits so well.
He really threw himself into that role. Like, he just dove into it like head first, and it really benefited not only his performance but the movie overall. I don't think the movie would have been the same without, like, if they casted anybody else for Kikuchiyo and they didn't bring that same energy, I think it would have felt a little more. It would have fell flat, straight up.
Definitely, it would have. I don't know who else could have captured it, honestly. I really don't know. I am a bit new to Asian cinema, but I just can't imagine that. I really can't. And one of the best action sequences in the movie was the final brawl, of course. The rain and the mud, just everything looked insane. And I can't imagine being on set for that. Because I could just imagine being there on set would be one of the most intense experiences.
It certainly was. When we watched the making of on the supplements, Kurosawa, or I don't know if it was Kurosawa himself, but I think it was the other writers who had talked about that part when it was all muddy, that was in the middle of February. It was freezing.
Wow.
And they weren't even supposed to be filming at that time. The filming had overextended. It was supposed to be, I want to say, anywhere between 3 to 7 months, and it ended up being stretched over to a year. So they weren't even prepared to be filming in the cold. And then one day in February, the entire set gets snowed over, so they have to melt the snow, which turned everything into mud, and everyone was just caked in it, knee deep in the mud. And one of the actors had explained, kind of in the same video or in the behind the scenes, where anytime where they weren't actually acting, I mean, that mud was solid. It was hard to move through it. But the second they said cut and everyone was going, they said they were riding around like lightning because they were so invested in the movie. And they were so invested in what they were doing that the second they said action, it was, they were hopping around like there was no mud. But it's also February, so it's cold, it's muddy, and they have to fake the rain with water trucks. And something that I thought that was cool, they tested a lot of different methods of rain, and this guy, I forgot what his position name was, but he was the one in charge of doing the rain effects, and he was trying to do this entire like engineered rig that he developed himself of like a spinning umbrella that just kind of throws the water. Wow. But they ended up not using it, and they did big bamboo leaves and just drizzled them, and then they had a guy in a water truck who apparently was like really good at that. Like he held the hose, and they said, and when Kurosawa said, make the rain look like it's like falling with the wind, and he did it perfectly.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, but I feel bad for everyone out there getting soaked in the February cold in Japan.
And not only that, like just a lot of the stunt work done, it looks like a lot of people got hurt.
Funny enough, not many people did get hurt.
Really?
Not many. Especially in the fighting scene, a lot of the crew members were surprised that nobody really ever got that hurt. I think one of the biggest things that happened on set was there was a wife of one of the samurai who ran away, like during the fight, and there was a building on fire behind her. I believe it was the windmill or the water mill.
Yes.
And she takes off this really decadent robe or like scarf kind of deal. The set paid almost $1 million for that. And she took it off, ran away, and then that scarf robe burnt. It burnt up on set. And that was just it. They couldn't do anything about it. They were just like, well, that's $1 million up in flames right then and there. Dang. Yeah. Insane.
That is insane. Wow, I can't imagine going through that and the realization of like how much it's worth. Wow. Oh my God, that's crazy.
Could you imagine like, I don't know if I hope it wasn't a rental, because A, that's a very expensive rental.
That is a very expensive rental.
Losing something of that costs that much, especially when your movie's already over budget, past its film deadline and all that, like I probably would have had a heart attack. I would have just dropped. That stress would have just blown my brains out.
Oh no, I feel that. And one thing I also wanted to bring up was that for the action sequences, one detail that I noticed that Kurosawa focused on so much is that with a lot of action movies nowadays, you just follow the point of view of the hero, but they never really show you like, let's say like, for example, Avengers, like it's Iron Man fighting, you're following Iron Man, all these robots are around him. You don't see their consequences too much. Where with Seven Samurai, it's like you see the hero, boom, he hits someone, and it shows you for a split second where he's going to fall, boom, they fall. And I think that is done so well, and that just adds a bit more intensity to it, especially with
Kikuchiyo.
Especially with Kikuchiyo's, man, sorry. Just thinking about it gets me a little bit sad. That final scene with him is just so good. And it's done so well. It's some of the best action I've seen in a film in a long, long time.
But yeah, with even I struggle with that name. Even with Kikuchiyo's character being kind of child of the historical civil wars that took place. Like, it really shows in his character because he's, at his root, he's like a traumatized child. And it shows in the ending where he's holding like this child with the burning windmill, or the burning watermill behind him. And he's just like, oh my gosh, like, this is me. Like, this has come full circle and this is me. Like, and I think that's what really inspires that change within him to, I guess, not be so much of a drunkard.
Definitely, for sure. I think he definitely has the best arc in the movie, if I'm being completely honest with you. And just everything about him is just flat out amazing.
Yeah. But for me, my favorite character would be the one of Kyuzo. And that's mainly because he's inspired, or he's heavily inspired by like the legendary, absolutely legendary samurai Miyamoto Musashi. His first duel was at 13 years old, and he won.
Jeez Louise, man.
And throughout his life, he had 60 more duels after that, each of which he had won. Wow. And his last one was at 31. And I thought that was interesting of him starting at 13 and ending at 31. It feels a little poetic in a sense. And
it definitely does. And
if with Miyamoto, he was also like a very renowned philosopher as well, of like Buddhist philosophy. So seeing like a philosopher swordsman, I mean, that's just like the recipe for an amazing character for any piece of art to be inspired by. And that's where Kyuzo comes in. He's just very soft-spoken. He's quiet, but when it's time for a fight, like, he's ready. And he will always come out on top because he will read you like a book. And no matter what you try to do, he's going to counter it. In his debut scene in the film, that dodge slash move he did was based off of Miyamoto's like final duel, where it was over. It was over before it really began, because it only took 1 to 2 moves to just end the fight. And it was, and that last duel of Miyamoto's was like one of the most legendary duels in history, at least in Japanese history. And funny enough, in the same year of this movie and Godzilla coming out, there's another movie about Miyamoto. It's called Samurai 1. And I forgot who directed it, but it was someone who was close with Kurosawa. So you can kind of see like this sphere of influence that Kurosawa found himself in. And also with his fascination with Westerns. I mean, he was so infatuated with John Ford that he wore glasses on set just like John Ford did. And they became really good friends too, where John Ford would send Kurosawa chrysanthemums as just like a token of friendship. And they were just really, really close. They were supposed to film a movie together. And I forgot what the movie was, but they were supposed to do it together. It ended up not happening. But I would have loved to have seen that occur. Because there's always that, I think if you remember the meme of like Japanese samurai and Western cowboys like existing at the same time. Yeah. Because it's funny that like they were around at the time of the Civil War, like the American Civil War, where people were sending telegraphs and all that to each other, and then the samurai were still like a thing. They were still a caste. They were still a class of people at that time, and that was, I guess, shortly before the Meiji Restoration, before the samurai were actually like outlawed. But to kind of circle back to my original point, Kyuzo, I couldn't get enough of him. He was just, I think he really laid out the template for like the man of a few words kind of character, but he's just kick-ass. He's just straight up kick-ass.
Yes, like I noticed a big influence of, I forgot which anime I was thinking of when I saw his character, but I know this character really relied on silence a whole lot. And when they spoke,
their words had weight.
Yeah, it had weight, and just their actions were just out of this world. And I love characters like that. And just like his facial expressions show it all. And I think he really did a great job acting wise when it came to that. I couldn't get over it.
Yeah.
he was definitely one of the best characters in that movie too. But I do prefer Kikuchuyo.
Yeah, sure. He definitely takes up the spotlight of it. Like, he really brings the movie to a level where really anybody can enjoy it. You can enjoy his character. You can enjoy the master character, the one in the, I forgot his name too, but the bald leader of the group. You know, Yoda was based off of him.
Yes.
And the way that he rubs his head, he's very wise, but he's still like a very fierce warrior. And what was it? This is common knowledge for people who have seen Seven Samurai and Star Wars, but George Lucas saw the wipe effect, the transition where it wiped across the screen. Like, that was quintessential Kurosawa editing. But George Lucas said that's going to work perfectly, and I think it did.
Yes,
I think
it definitely does.
Absolutely phenomenal.
It flows so much. It flows very well. I do think it's a lot more effective in Seven Samurai, for sure. But it does definitely flow well in Star Wars. So anyways, like, I think this movie is genuinely really hilarious. I was very surprised going in. And I feel like that balanced itself so perfectly. And Kurosawa does that so well. Because I feel like it never loses the audience's attention. I definitely feel like if there was no comedy elements in it, I feel like the audience, especially at that time period, would be like, this is a good restroom break. I'll be right back.
It definitely would have came off a little more dull.
For sure. And I think it's just done really well. And that's something that's kind of hard nowadays with a lot of action films, is capturing that comedic feeling. And like, take for instance, the Marvel movies. They can't. They can't. It's just so out of place. I think the only exception I can say is the Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, I just really don't think so. Like, it's always like, wow, that was a really big, impactful moment. That's really sad. Hey, look what I got right here. Like, it's just so...
It's funny enough, I think Star Wars suffers the same thing, at least like...
Especially in the newer movies, for sure. Like, I think the beginning of The Last Jedi really, really suffers from it. When Poe is trying to talk to... what's his name?
General Hux.
Yeah, General Hux. He's like, I need to speak to General Hux. He's like, this is General Hux, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'll wait.
Tell your precious princess there will be no terms. There will be no surrender.
Hi, I'm holding for General Hux.
This is Hux. You and your friends are doomed. We will wipe your filth from the galaxy.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
And it's just like, come on. Like, this is not balancing itself well.
The second they hit him with your mom joke, I was like, I was never, ever betting on a your mom joke occurring in Star Wars. That was kind of a flashbang for me.
Definitely, for sure. But like I said, I think Kurosawa just handles the humor so well that action movies cannot do nowadays at all.
And I think that was another kind of odd added benefit from the actor's performance, specifically Kikuchi's.
Yes.
I want to say his last name was Mifune. Sorry, audience. I'm trying, I swear.
No, you're doing a good job.
No, but there's not really much more to say that either hasn't already been said or that we haven't already said at this point.
Yes. It was great having you here, Logan. I cannot wait to rewatch this movie for sure. Thank you all for watching the first ever episode of Beyond the Spine. This is your host, Joey. See you later.